I'm just putting together this video for something that I did a long time ago to create a pulse effect. It was a very easy thing to put together because it's not very complicated, and it involves scrolling UVs. It's a very old school thing to do. There's probably more efficient or sort of more automated ways of doing this these days. But this was something I did a long time ago in order to create a pulse effect in game, and it's surprisingly simple to put together. There's only two elements. It's just a polygon object in a circular polygon object and a texture. So these objects that I have here, they're all just basically kind of plates of polygons with a small center and a wider outside. And when I press play, you can see there's a pulsing texture that just happens in there. This was one of the issues when I first tried to create this. Was I tried taking building the rings and expanding them and getting multiple rings and making them disappear over time. It was a really difficult thing to do, actually, and I just needed a simple way to put this together. And all of these, all they are is a simple scrolling UV system. So if we have a look in the hypershade, I've just got some let's just stop that for a second. I've just got offset UVs animated here, so they just go from 0 to 1, and if you can see my keys here, frame 1, frame 25, and they just move. If you look over on the right hand side here, you can see how there's just an offset of the UVs. Essentially what that means is when I select the object here, and if I go to the UV texture editor, you can see the UVs in here. Now normally what we'd have is you'd have your UVs laid out. Normally this would be flat, so I can give you an idea of that. If I just create UVs, plane and map it from the top. Now normally you'd have the UVs spread out like this here, so you'd be able to see them. That's the traditional way of seeing the UVs. But what we can do is we can play around with these. If we flatten them and we put them in a certain formation, which is what I've done here, I've stretched them out. The inside UVs here are all on this spot here, and the outside UVs are all on this spot here. And then what I've done is, if I go into the hypershade, I go into the place, the 2D texture placement here, and in here we have the ability to offset the UV, which means essentially to kind of move it. It's a little bit like if you imagine taking a picture frame and moving the picture within the frame and moving it around from left to right, up and down. So what you can see here is if I set the offset to 0.5, if we look at the UV texture here, let's have a look at it for this one. So that's it there. Now if I've animated this so that let's go to the hypershade, and I'll select that there. Currently the offset is 1 and 1. Normally I think it's 0, it defaults to 0, 0. 0 and 1 are essentially the same thing, it's just starting back. It's starting back to going back to where it started from. It's the same as 360 degrees is the same as 0 degrees essentially. It just means that you've wound all the way back and you started again at 1. So if I move this along here, you'll notice the value changes, and what it's doing is it's moving it in one direction, which is U, which is to the right, and then it's also moving it up, which is V, which is this one, which is moving it upwards. So if we move it along, you can see this image shifts. Okay, so currently it's set to 1, so it's the image here is set here. So imagine this is our picture frame and this is our picture behind it, and now what we're doing is by changing these values, as I move that along, let's move it halfway, so it's 50%, it means I've shifted the picture within the frame 50% over to the right and 50% up. So I'll just go through that again. See, and so that gives it the effect of moving diagonally. So you can see here when I move this and when I play it, it pulses like that. That's the general gist. So what I'm going to do now is just show you how to create that texture, what the texture looks like, and we'll just create this from scratch so you can see what you need to do in order to be able to do that. So I'm just going to create a new scene, and in here I'm just going to create my polygon object to start with. So if I go to create and go to polygon primitives, and I'm using 2015, I know I should be using 2017, but I'm just going to, it's an old school way of doing things, so I'm just going to use something a little bit older. So I'm going to use 24 axis divisions because I need it to be quite round. I'm going to use 2 cap divisions because I'm going to delete the central part. So I'm going to apply that now. And in here I've got my 24 divisions, so it's quite round in there, and just going to take away the side faces, and I'm also going to take away these middle faces here. So I just have this circular, we'll just have my circle of polygons. In here I'm going to just select a bunch of UVs, and if I go to the UV texture editor, well, first of all actually I'm going to split this, so I need to cut this along one of the edges. So I'm going to select an edge. Currently if I move this around, these are all connected in a ring, and I need to break that ring. So I'm going to go to polygons, and I'm going to cut UV edges in there. Now what happens is, if I do the UVs here in the center, if it's going to behave itself, let's sit there. So if I take the UVs in the center, what I can do is move those out. I'm going to crush them down there. So what I've done there is I've scaled them all to, let's say, the right hand side, so it's scaled it to the rightmost UV. Everything has aligned it to that, and then I'm going to scale or align them to the bottommost UV, to there, like that. And I'm going to do the same with this one, bottom and right, and there I should have now my outer ring and my inner ring there, all selected and all crushed down. The other thing I'm going to do is turn on grid snap here, because the grid snap works not only for the grid in the viewport, but it also works for the grid in here. And I'm going to grid snap these points to halfway up this main section here, the main UV area, and halfway down into this other UV here. So if I select those, you can see it's at 0.5 and it's at 0.5. So I've set that up now, and I'll show you why that is in a second. If I go into Photoshop, what I've done is I've created this texture, and it's basically a glow in a shape of a rugby ball or American football, and I'll show you why I've done it in this shape in a second. So I've created this glow. I've put this black background in simply to show you what this looks like, because when I take this away it's really difficult to see, so I've just popped that in there, and I've saved off a copy of this, so I've called it pulse.png, so you can see that there. Okay, so if I go back into Maya, and if I go to my hypershade, and I'm just going to create a Lambert, and I'm just going to pick up this PNG that I created, so pulse PNG in there. Now what I'll do, go back to my hypershade. I'm just going to need to make this brighter, so I'm just turn the ambient color up. I'm going to select this object here, just going to right click here and assign the material to the selection. Comes out white because I haven't got the material showing at the moment. So I've pressed 6 and now I can see the material. Well, the material is shown, it's just that I'm just looking at pure alpha there at the moment. So if I go into the UV texture editor, the reason I see nothing is because it's over an area of alpha. Now essentially what I'm trying to do is I want the pulse to start in the middle. So actually I've probably got these at the wrong end. Have I got them at the wrong end? Let me think. We'll find out in a sec. So I want the pulse to start in the middle, and I want it to move out to the sides, and I'll just mimic that. Oops. By moving this UV physically across the grid. So if I move that through the grid there, so I'm going from here and I'm going to just move it at 45 degrees diagonally down here. As I move that, you can see that it creates this pulse like this. So it naturally just creates a pulse. So if I then, but I can't move these UVs, I can't physically move these UVs that belong to the object itself. That's in code. That's a really tricky thing to do. But what I can do is I can offset this image, just like I was saying. It's like moving a painting within a frame. It's so to speak. That's the best way I can imagine explaining that. So if I go into the hypershade, and it's usually a bit of trial and error, I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to go into my offset UV space here. I'm actually going to turn these to 1. This may or may not work. I might have to play around with it just to see, but I'm going to turn these to 1. And like I was saying, it's 1 and 0 are the same. It's like 360 degrees being the same as 0 degrees. Essentially, you've gone all the way around back to the same point. So that's fine. The only difference is if you start at 1 and animate through to 0, you go in a different direction than if you start at 0 and animate through to 1. I'll show you in a sec because I might get this wrong. So if we right click on here, I'm going to set the key, and I'm going to right click on this one and set the key. So it's starting off at 1. I'm going to move through to 25 frames, and I'm going to then change this to 0 and 0, right click, set key, right click and set key. And now what should happen, is it moves. So essentially I'm moving that image in here. Let's have a look at the UV texture editor, see if I can get the two things up at the same time. UV texture editor, and if I select that at the same time, shift select that, you'll see that when I move this over time, it's shifting the image over to the top right hand corner, which means as it appears here, because essentially there's a duplicate here of let me just hold on a second. So as essentially, although you don't see it here, this image is duplicated. So in this image here, because we tile the UVs, this has the same image. It appears here, here, here and here. You just kind of have to imagine it. As this blob moves across here, it essentially, because it's tiled, it'll cut in down here. It'll start to appear down this end here. So if I select the UVs, you can see them all there. So this cloud, if you imagine a cloud here, starts to then appear, this bit here starts to stick out, and it's 0708. Oh, sorry, no. Basically the top left corner of this frame, it will appear. So it's appearing here, as though you can't see it because I haven't got that particular. I can't view this this image tiled, but just trust me, it's appearing down here, just as it is there. And as it does appear, it's also moving. So as it moves along, it moves up and through this set of UVs until it eventually comes out the other side. So it's starting to fade here, move, and then it comes away. So it's completely come away, it's completely faded, and then it's completely disappeared. So it gives the effect, essentially, of starting to appear, because it's nice and fluffy at the edges, so it starts to cut in, starts to appear, it moves through the UVs, it's completely opaque there, or sort of semi-opaque, a bit further around the edges, and then as we move through, it completely disappears as it comes to the edges there. So that's how we get this effect. And if you want to pulse it, essentially we just go to Graph Editor, go back to the hypershade, select my UV texture, and in there we can see the keys. I want to straighten these out, so I'm going to click on linear, so I'll get a nice straight view, and I'm going to go to curves, post infinity, cycle, and if you want to see what that looks like, we just need to view infinity, and we'll get this sawtooth effect. And basically it's going from 1 through to 0, back to 1, through to 0, and that's what it's doing there. That just means it's repeating the animation. So if I just play this through now, you can see that you just get this pulse that's repeating the animation there. Now, the other thing I want to do is, at the moment the pulse is really thin, so it starts there, and what I'm going to do is just grab the edge, scale it in like this, and then let's play it, and now it should start from the middle. There you go, so you get a nice pulse in there. Now depending on the type of texture you use, if I go back to my Photoshop file, I can try different things. So I can try a pulse that's a double pulse, or essentially I think that's the same thing as I've just had. Yeah, so I can create this one which will create 2 pulses, and I can also create, so I've got this one, my normal one which is here, which is my cloud. So you remember when I first applied this, I couldn't see anything because my UVs were along this side, this edge here. So they were in transparent, they were over a transparent area. Well, now if I fill this, so if I fill this area, which is basically this image here, but as if it's kind of moving halfway through. So I've kind of cut it into quarters and moved those quarters to the corners. What I'll do is I'll get two pulses. I'll get a double pulse, and you'll be able to see that. And another one that I've tried is a sort of a hard-edged pulse. So we'll try these out here. If we go back into Maya, and I'm just going to try. I'm going to get a hyper shade. I'm going to go to pulse 2. This was the hard-edged one, so that has a hard edge to it. And go back into here, and I'm going to try pulse 3. Now this is the one that had 2 pulses in it. So we've got one that's already appeared. So if I click on that and go to UV texture editor, go back to 1, that was my middle one. So that's I can't see this one because if I look at my UVs, they're all at the edge here. So that one isn't appearing, but the ones at the corners are. Because this is tiled, so if you have to imagine this is tiled, if I was to move this image over to the right hand frame down here and down here, what I would get is a complete complete sort of cloud, sort of pulse image here. So that would be on, there would be a bit here and there would be a bit there, so it would repeat properly. So that's why I would get this. I've got this circle currently starting in the middle, and then another one appearing and another one appearing. That's how I get my multiple pulse in there. So I press play, you can see that pulses continually like that. So it's a really handy little device here. So it's nice and simple. There's 2 keyframes in it. It just involves some a few polygons and a very simple texture, and it's very easy to do. The texture itself, obviously, I mean, you'll probably know how to do this. It's pretty simple. All I need to do is to create an ellipse, and just did that. I just created an ellipse, and in fact I didn't even do that. I think I just went and did a gradient, and then created a gradient like that, and then just squashed it down. That was all it was. So it's very easy to produce that pulse image. Very easy to do indeed. So if I go back to here, so it's nice and simple to do. I can change the shape of it if I want to. I can change it into a square, so which is nice and easy to do. So let's have a look at this. So let's take these ones for instance. So I'll take that, and I'll take this one like that. Not totally a square, but you'll get the idea. So I can just have it pulse as a square in there. So I can just change the properties of it, change it to whatever shape I want to, and it's a really simple and effective way of working. And it was something I put together a number of years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was working with mobile games, and also much lower specs than is possible these days. Which is why it's got this kind of fairly simple approach, but it's something that could be useful for mobile games today. If you've got a game that's just really simple, that needs to run on really low spec devices, it could be quite a fun thing to do. Or if you just need to have an effect and you don't want to go into the complexities of dealing with some really complex dynamics, it's a pretty simple and easy way of creating a glow and a pulse that works like that. So hopefully you find that useful, and if you've got any questions, please post them in the comments below.